The desert was silent, vast, and endless. The golden sands of Egypt stretched to the horizon, glowing under the late afternoon sun. The air shimmered with heat, and the mighty pyramids of Giza cast long shadows across the land, monuments to the eternity of Pharaoh's reign. But on this day, something stirred in the desert that no priest, no soldier, no farmer by the Nile had ever witnessed before. Atop a towering stone platform, Pharaoh himself stood tall, draped in linen of purest white, crowned with a double diadem of Upper and Lower Egypt. His face was solemn, his eyes fixed on the heavens. Behind him rose not a pyramid, not a temple, but a strange structure of bronze and stone, a launching tower that seemed to pierce the sky itself. The priests knelt. The soldiers held their breath. The common people, gathered in their thousands, pressed their foreheads into the sand. Pharaoh raised his hand. A deafening roar split the silence of the desert. And then, in an instant, it happened. A massive spear of fire tore its way into the heavens. A cylinder of metal, larger than any obelisk, thundered upward on a pillar of flame. The ground shook. The sky blazed. The desert wind carried the smell of fire and thunder, and the people of Egypt screamed not in terror, but in awe. Some collapsed, convinced that the god Ra himself had descended. Others cried out prayers, shouting, "Behold the spear of Ra! Behold the weapon of the sun!" A miracle in their eyes? To the people of Egypt, there could be no doubt. Pharaoh was already worshipped as the living son of Ra, the earthly bridge between gods and mortals. But now he commanded the very fire of the heavens. They had seen torches. They had seen lightning. They had seen meteors fall from the sky on rare nights. But never had they seen a man summon such fire at will and send it soaring into the clouds. "This," whispered the priests, "is not a weapon of men. This is the voice of Ra, given form. This is the spear that strikes the enemies of Egypt, wherever they may hide." The name spread like wildfire. The spear of Ra. The world watches beyond the Nile. Rumors traveled fast. Messengers and merchants carried tales of the miracle. In Babylon, scribes recorded the news with trembling hands. The Pharaoh commands the fire of heaven. In Hittite lands, warriors muttered that no wall, no chariot, no army could withstand such a weapon. In Canaan, in Nubia, in Assyria, everywhere, rulers turned their eyes southward with fear. Egypt had always been rich, powerful, and blessed by the Nile. But now, with this weapon, it was something more. It was untouchable. The dual nature of power, for Pharaoh, the missile was more than just a weapon. It was a message. To his people, it was divine proof of his godhood. To his enemies, it was an unspoken threat. He did not need to fight, to bleed, to send his armies to die in foreign sands. He only needed to lift his hand, to whisper a command, and the spear of Ra could obliterate a city hundreds of miles away. Power like this had never existed in the ancient world. One man held the key not just to rule, but to annihilation. But there was also a shadow in Pharaoh's heart. He knew this was not a gift freely given by the gods. He knew this was something far more dangerous, far more fragile. One mistake, one act of rage, one betrayal, and the spear of Ra would not just destroy his enemies. It could destroy Egypt itself. A new age begins that night. Thebes was alive with celebration. The priests sang hymns to Ra, praising the gift he had bestowed upon his son. Dancers filled the streets, and people lit fires along the Nile, believing that their pharaoh had now become the most powerful being on earth. But in the royal palace, Pharaoh sat in silence. Outside, his people called him a god. Inside, he stared at the sealed chamber where the spear of Ra was kept, guarded by soldiers who did not even understand what they were guarding. He whispered to himself, "With this, I rule the world. With this, I could end the world." The question the desert winds held. The pyramids loomed in the distance, ancient even then. Pharaoh rose, walking to the balcony that overlooked the city of Thebes. Thousands of torches flickered in the night like stars fallen to earth. He closed his eyes and imagined one missile, fired in anger, striking Babylon. Another, fired in pride, striking Hattusa. Entire cities gone in a heartbeat. Entire peoples erased. Yes, Pharaoh had been given the spear of Re-ha, but what kind of god would he become, protector of Egypt or destroyer of the world? And more importantly, if he, a single man in ancient times, could not resist the temptation of ultimate power, what does that say about us today, living in a world where such weapons are real and waiting? That is how the legend of the Spear of Rhea begins. But the question remains, if Pharaoh truly possessed a nuclear missile, how would he wield it? To conquer, to protect, or to destroy? The answer lies in the next chapter. The day the missile thundered into the sky, Egypt crossed an invisible line. The Nile still flooded each year, the pyramids still cast their shadows across the desert, and the temples still echoed with hymns to Ra. But everything had changed. The people no longer saw Pharaoh as merely the son of the gods. They believed he now commanded the fire of the heavens themselves. In the eyes of the people, a miracle from the sun. For the farmers who tilled the banks of the Nile, the missile was not a machine of war, it was a miracle. They had no words for rocket engines or nuclear warheads. To them, the roar was the voice of Rhea. The flame was his breath, and the missile itself was a divine spear hurled across the sky. Children whispered that Pharaoh could throw a piece of the sun itself at his enemies. Mothers told their sons, "Obey the Pharaoh, or the spear of Ra will find you no matter where you hide." Fear and devotion blended into one. Pharaoh had always ruled by divine right, but now his divinity had been proven before their very eyes. In the temples, the weapon becomes a sacred relic. The priests, ever the guardians of belief, wasted no time sanctifying the missile. They declared that Rhea had placed his power into Pharaoh's hands, and that the spear was not a weapon, but a holy relic. They built a shrine around the launch site, decorating it with golden hieroglyphs. Pharaoh standing beside Ra, holding a blazing spear aimed at the horizon. Every year, on the festival of Ra, Pharaoh would stand before the shrine, raise his hand, and the priest would chant, "O spear of the sun, strike down the enemies of Kemet. Burn them in the light of the divine." To the crowd of thousands, even the mere sight of the missile silent, resting on its launch pad, was enough to silence rebellion. It was no longer just a weapon of war. It was a pillar of faith. In the palace, Pharaoh controls his court. Inside the royal court, Pharaoh used the missile as the ultimate instrument of control. When nobles whispered of corruption or dared question his commands, he reminded them with cold words, "Do you wish me to summon the spear of Ra? To burn your estates from the sky?" No noble dared answer. Pharaoh no longer needed spies or assassins. The fear of annihilation silenced dissent better than any blade. Even the most ambitious governor bowed low, terrified that his city might vanish in a single strike. In war, the shadow over enemies. Before the age of missiles, Egyptian armies marched with chariots, bronze swords, and shields of leather. They fought bravely, but they bled heavily. Now Pharaoh did not need to fight. When the Nubians rebelled to the south, Pharaoh sent no army, only a messenger carrying a tablet etched with a warning. One command, and Re's spear will fall upon your villages. The rebellion ended before it began. When the Hittites gathered chariots on the frontier, Pharaoh ordered the priests to ignite the engines of the missile, sending flames roaring into the sky as a display. The Hittites scattered, convinced the gods themselves had intervened. Even distant Babylon sent envoys, bearing gold, lapis lazuli, and slaves, begging Pharaoh to spare them from the fire of the heavens. In an age when wars lasted decades, Pharaoh achieved victory without lifting a sword. His enemies bowed not to his armies, but to the fear of his weapon. In diplomacy, Egypt becomes the world's hegemon. Pharaoh's dominance reshaped the ancient world. Egypt became the unquestioned center of power. Kings and emperors from foreign lands no longer spoke as equals. They came as supplicants, bearing tribute to appease the master of the spear. The king of Babylon addressed Pharaoh not as brother, but as lord. The Assyrians, known for their cruelty, swore never to raise arms against Egypt. Smaller states in Canaan declared themselves Pharaoh's vassals, paying taxes in grain and soldiers. For the first time in history, the entire Near East lived under a single shadow, the shadow of Pharaoh's missile. In daily life, fear becomes the law, but power came with a price. The farmers, the craftsmen, the traders all lived in silent fear. Pharaoh's commands were law before, but now they felt like the law of nature itself. To disobey was not merely rebellion, it was suicide. Parents told children bedtime stories of rebels struck down by the spear of Ra. Merchants whispered that one day Pharaoh might grow angry and cast the sun on them. Even priests, once powerful in their own right, now feared Pharaoh more than they feared the gods. The weapon was supposed to bring security. Instead, it created a society trapped in paranoia. In Pharaoh's own heart, the weight of godhood, Pharaoh himself was not untouched. Each night, he walked alone to the chamber where the missile rested, its steel shell gleaming under torchlight. He touched the cold metal and whispered, "With this, I am Ra. With this, I could destroy the world." But doubt gnawed at him. Was he truly a god? Or merely a man playing with divine fire? He knew the truth the priests dared not speak. The missile was no eternal relic. It was fragile, dangerous. If it misfired, it could burn Egypt itself. Pharaoh held the most powerful weapon the world had ever seen, but also the most dangerous burden. A fragile balance. Thus Egypt entered a golden age, but one built on the edge of a knife. Pharaoh's enemies dared not rise. His people worshipped him as a living god. His empire stretched across deserts and seas. Yet beneath the triumph, cracks formed. Foreign spies whispered of stealing the weapon. Priests debated whether the spear was a gift or a curse. And within Pharaoh himself, the shadow of fear grew. Because deep down, he knew, a weapon that can destroy the world will eventually demand to be used. The spear of Rhea had risen once, roaring into the sky, and from that day forward, the world was never the same. Egypt was not merely a kingdom on the Nile anymore, it was a force that cast its shadow across deserts, mountains, and seas. Yet, the greater the shadow, the deeper the fear that grew beneath it. The subjugation of nations, Babylon, the city of scribes and stars. In Babylon, where astronomers charted the heavens and priests read omens in the stars, the news of Pharaoh's weapon spread like wildfire. They had long believed that the gods controlled the skies, but now a man immortal had seized that power. The king of Babylon gathered his court and asked, "If Pharaoh can hurl fire into the sky, what stops him from hurling it upon our city?" The scribes trembled. The generals argued. In the end, Babylon sent emissaries to Thebes, bearing gold, slaves, and sacred texts, offering them to Pharaoh as tribute. For the first time, Babylon, the great city of Hammurabi, bent its knee. The Hittites, masters of chariots. The Hittites, fierce warriors of Anatolia, once clashed with Egypt in the bloody Battle of Kadesh. Their chariots had dominated the sands. But now, what use were chariots against a weapon that could obliterate armies in an instant? Their king convened his war council. The generals spoke of building stronger walls, forging sharper blades. But the priests whispered, "No wall can stop the fire of heaven." The Hittites sent gifts of horses and iron weapons to Pharaoh not as rivals, but as servants. Nubia and Libya, Egypt's neighbors. In Nubia, the tribes of the south rose in rebellion as they had countless times before. But this time, Pharaoh did not march his army. He sent only a messenger who held a clay tablet etched with a single message. "Obey or Ra's spear will strike your villages." The rebellion ended before it began. The Nubians sent cattle, ivory, and gold in submission. In Libya, raiders once plagued Egypt's borders. But when the skies thundered with the roar of Pharaoh's missile, they fled back into the desert, whispering of gods who wielded fire. Egypt as the world's center. The world had shifted. Where once power was shared between mighty kingdoms, Babylon, Hittite, Assyria, and Egypt, now only one center remained: Thebes, the heart of Pharaoh's empire. Envoys from every land crowded the palace. They did not negotiate. They begged. Pharaoh sat upon his golden throne, silent as they bowed, offering treasures, concubines, even their own children as hostages. And each time, Pharaoh raised his hand toward the horizon, where the spear of Ra gleamed under the desert sun, and the envoys shuddered in silence. Egypt was no longer one power among many. Egypt was the hegemon of the ancient world. The transformation of religion. The priests of Re seized upon the missile as proof of their god's supremacy. "No god of Babylon, no god of Hatti, no god of Canaan can match Re," they declared. "For Re has given his fire to his son, Pharaoh." Temples rose across the land, adorned with carvings of Pharaoh hurling the spear of Rhea into the sky. Hymns were rewritten, prayers altered. No longer did they beg Rhea for mercy, they begged Pharaoh, who now was Rhea made flesh. The missile itself became an object of worship. Pilgrims came from across Egypt to kneel before its shrine, believing that to touch its shadow was to receive a blessing. Mothers carried their children to see it, whispering, "Behold the fire of the gods." Faith and fear became one. And with every passing day, Pharaoh's divinity seemed more unquestionable. The fear among the people, yet not all was glory. The common people, who once sang hymns joyfully during the floods of the Nile, now whispered in terror at night. What if Pharaoh grows angry? They asked, what if he unleashes the fire not on foreigners but on us? A merchant muttered in secret, better to be ruled by the whip than by a weapon that could end us all in an instant. Even soldiers, once proud to die for Egypt, now marched with unease. They no longer protected Pharaoh with their spears, they guarded the shrine of a weapon they did not understand, and that frightened them more than any enemy. The rise of spies and thieves, Pharaoh's enemies had bowed, but not all were loyal. In the shadows, foreign rulers plotted. Hittite spies crept into Thebes, disguised as traders, hoping to glimpse the secret of the missile. Babylonian agents bribed guards, whispering promises of gold to those who might let them near the weapon. One night, a spy did manage to breach the shrine. He stood before the spear of Rhea, trembling, awed by its size, its gleaming metal. He reached out to touch it, believing that if he could carry even a piece of it home, Babylon might wield such power too. But he was caught. Dragged before Pharaoh, he confessed, "The spear is no god's gift. It is a weapon, and if a man can use it, so can others." Pharaoh had him executed publicly, his body burned as a warning. Yet his words lingered. For the first time, whispers spread. Maybe the spear was not divine, but dangerous. The cracks within the priests who once praised Pharaoh began to fear him. They held secret meetings asking, what if Pharaoh uses the spear against us? What if Re's gift was not a blessing, but a curse? Some even proposed sealing the weapon away, hiding it from Pharaoh himself. But how does one hide the sun from the sky? Inside the palace, the nobles grew restless. Pharaoh no longer listened to counsel. His word was absolute, backed by the threat of annihilation. They wondered, had the spear made him a god, or had it made him a tyrant? A world held hostage beyond Egypt. The world fell into uneasy silence. Wars ceased, rebellions ended, conquests halted. On the surface, there was peace. But it was not peace born of harmony. It was peace born of terror. Kings did not fight because they feared destruction. People did not rebel because they feared annihilation. The world had not grown wiser. It had merely grown afraid. The shadow of destiny, Pharaoh stood upon his balcony, gazing at the missile in its shrine. His empire was greater than any before. His people worshipped him as a god. His enemies knelt in submission. And yet, he felt no triumph, only a question that haunted him every night. What is the purpose of power that must never be used? The spear of Ra gave him dominion over the world, but it also shackled him in fear of using it, fear of losing it, fear of what it meant for mankind. And so Egypt entered a new age, not of glory, but of dread. An age where one man's weapon held the fate of the world in its shadow. Egypt stood at the height of its glory. The pyramids gleamed in the desert sun, the Nile carried life to every field, and Pharaoh ruled over lands stretching farther than any before him. Yet beneath the surface of this golden age, cracks spread, cracks born of fear, suspicion, and the terrible weight of the spear of Ra, Pharaoh's burden. Each night, Pharaoh walked alone to the sacred chamber where the missile rested. Its steel skin gleamed in torchlight, cold and lifeless, yet filled with a power beyond comprehension. He placed his hand on it, whispering, "With this I hold the world. With this I could end it." The priests called it divine. The people called it miraculous. But Pharaoh knew the truth. It was not divine. It was fragile, dangerous, and absolute. And absolute power isolates. Where once he dined with nobles and laughed with generals, now he sat alone. Every advisor's word felt like manipulation. Every priest's prayer felt like a scheme. Could he trust anyone? Or were they all waiting, watching, hoping to control the spear for themselves? The priests' fear. At first, the priests proclaimed the missile as Re's gift. But the more they watched Pharaoh wield its terror, the more unease crept into their hearts. What if Pharaoh grows angry with us? One whispered. What if he declares the temples obsolete and strikes us down? Another asked. In secret, a faction of priests gathered. They proposed sealing the spear away, locking it deep in the desert, hidden from Pharaoh himself. They believed they were protecting Egypt. But others warned, to oppose Pharaoh is to invite destruction. If he discovers our plot, he will use the spear on us. Thus, even among Ra's servants, unity shattered. The nobles' conspiracy. The nobles, too, grew restless. Pharaoh no longer sought their counsel. He no longer bargained or negotiated. His word was law, backed not by armies, but by the threat of the spear. One noble murmured, "If he has the power to burn Babylon, what stops him from burning us?" Another answered, "We must act before he destroys Egypt itself." And so, whispers of treachery spread in the marble halls. A conspiracy formed, to seize the missile or to destroy it. But how does one plot against a man who commands the fire of the heavens? The people's despair, among the common folk, life grew darker. Children no longer sang hymns of Pharaoh's glory, they whispered stories of terror. If you lie, mothers warned, the spear of Ra will find you. Farmers prayed less for fertile floods and more for Pharaoh's mercy, fearing he might unleash the weapon upon them for reasons they could not understand. Even joy vanished from festivals. Where once people danced, now they watched the skies, as if expecting the sun itself to fall upon them. Egypt had not become a land of prosperity, it had become a land of dread. The foreign intrigue. Beyond Egypt's borders, enemies plotted. Babylon, Hittite, and Assyria, though cowed into submission, knew they could never be truly safe while the spear of Ra existed. Spies returned again and again, hoping to steal its secrets. Bribes were offered to guards. Assassins crept through Thebes at night. One group of Hittite spies even attempted to sabotage the launch chamber. They were caught and executed, but their attempt sent shockwaves through Pharaoh's court. If enemies dared such risks, how long before one succeeded? The first rebellion, it began in Nubia. A band of rebels, convinced the missile was a curse and not a blessing, rose against Egyptian garrisons. They believed that if the spear of Rhea could strike from the heavens, then Rhea himself must have abandoned mankind. Pharaoh responded with rage. He did not unleash the missile, but he paraded it before his people, igniting its engines so the sky thundered with fire. "See what fate awaits my enemies," he declared. The rebellion ended swiftly, crushed not by spears, but by terror. Yet the message was clear. Resistance had begun to grow, not from enemies abroad, but from within Egypt itself. The attempted coup. One night, whispers turned into action. A group of nobles, allied with disillusioned priests, attempted to storm the sacred chamber. Their plan was simple: seize the missile, hide it, and declare that Pharaoh had lost Rhea's favor. But the guards were loyal, or perhaps more afraid of Pharaoh than of rebellion. Steel clashed against bronze in the torchlit corridors. Blood stained the temple stones. Pharaoh himself appeared, towering in his golden crown, his voice thundering. "You dare challenge Ra's will? You dare touch the spear?" The conspirators were dragged before the people and executed. Their bodies were burned beneath the shadow of the missile, a warning to all. But their whispers lingered in the hearts of others. The shadow of paranoia. After the coup, Pharaoh trusted no one. Advisors were dismissed. Priests were silenced. Guards were executed at the slightest hint of disloyalty. He withdrew deeper into isolation, visiting the missile more often, staring at it for hours as though seeking answers. Some said he began to speak to it, calling it his silent brother. Others claimed he believed the missile whispered back. Egypt's ruler had become a prisoner, not of foreign enemies, not of rebels, but of his own weapon. The question of destiny. The empire outwardly thrived. Tribute flowed in from every nation. Egypt stood unchallenged. But inside, fear consumed everything. Pharaoh, his court, his people. And the question echoed louder each day: what is the purpose of a weapon that must never be used? Pharaoh had peace, but it was peace born of dread. He had loyalty, but it was loyalty born of terror. He had power, but it was power that hollowed him from within. The price of power was not just the fear of others. It was the destruction of his own humanity. Egypt stood at the edge of greatness and at the edge of ruin. The spear of Ra had given Pharaoh dominion over the world, but it had also sown the seeds of Egypt's downfall. But the real question is not what Pharaoh did. The real question is what we will do. We hold our own spears of Ra nuclear missiles, capable of destroying cities, nations, perhaps the entire earth. Will we use them as Pharaoh did, to dominate through fear? Will we live forever in paranoia, trapped in a fragile peace? Or will we find another way before the fire of heaven consumes us as it nearly consumed Egypt? Pharaoh's story is a myth, what if? But the shadow of his dilemma is very real. So let us ask, as he once did, who truly holds the Sun Man or the weapon? And perhaps the most haunting question of all: what happens when the spear of Ra demands to be used?